something like an albino came along, they discovered, wow, we can get straight in. And it may well be that the paler skinned nation, people on the earth, have that pale skin because of this genetic experimentation to make things easier for them to work on human DNA. And in fact, Professor Steve Jones argues that this thing about vitamin D being, pale skin being there to allow vitamin D to be absorbed and so on, all these theories about why pale skin happened in the first place.
First of all, man, wow. Dr. Yakub, anyone? Dr. Yakub, anyone?
If you knew what you were made of, then we would save the world.
Yeah. Okay, so how you doing, people? Welcome to the King Mono show. And I thought I'd react to this clip. It's a clip I've actually gone through in some detail. Well, actually not gone through some detail, but I've talked about the subject in some detail on my channel. So if you want to check out some of the longer live streams I've done on the subject or the topic of melanin, then please do feel free to go to the King's Monologue channel, and you'll if you scroll through the live streams, you'll see a few live streams. I think the thumbnail says Melaninjas on there, and they give you some good insight from medical professionals about some of the aspects of melanin that aren't really discussed in public. So a lot of this stuff kind of goes unnoticed. But I just thought I'd share this clip with you guys so we can kind of like view it together. It's a little bit controversial, but it being controversial, I don't think makes it any less true. So look, have a watch and tell me what you think of it.
About melanin and how it protects the cell, the DNA inside the nucleus.
I mean,
that's very important.
Part of the reason you can't do these experiments, where there's a lot of melanin around, the melanin actually in a lot of people, in black people, it's actually spread out through the skin. It spreads out through the cells and covers everything from the actions of the ultraviolet light.
There's no doubt in people with higher melanin, natural higher melanin, that it's far more likely that melanin will be coating the nucleus, the cell wall of the nucleus of the DNA. Now the point about that is that ultraviolet light, which is often used to splice DNA, is blocked by that melanin. It absorbs it. It doesn't allow it in to interfere with the DNA. And it could well be, and this is Nigel's thesis, that this was a blocker for them when they were trying to genetically alter the species. And therefore, when maybe just out of random mutation, something like an albino came along, they discovered, wow, we can get straight in. And it may well be that the paler skinned nation, people on the earth, have that pale skin because of this genetic experimentation to make things easier for them to work on human DNA. And in fact, Professor Steve Jones argues that this thing about vitamin D being, pale skin being there to allow vitamin D to be absorbed and so on, all these theories about why pale skin happened in the first place.
First of all, man, wow. Dr. Yakub, anyone? Dr. Yakub, anyone? I mean, I'm just saying, you can say what you want, but the Nation of Islam's theory on the origin of the human species just became a whole lot more credible because he's just essentially giving you the science behind essentially what they say. Now, like I am not Nation of Islam, I'm not religious in the slightest. It's important for me to share that, but I just think it's quite ironic that she's essentially saying that the lack of melanin means that an individual or a group can be externally, or at least their DNA can be externally modified using UV rays. There's no protection. And this is one of the things that links back to the reason why melanoma is contracted at such an astronomically high rate amongst Europeans in comparison to melanated populations, obviously in particular Africans. The reason the rate is so extremely different is because essentially pale skin doesn't allow any kind of protection of the penetration of UVA and UVB into essentially right into the body. And when that reacts with pheomelanin, which is the kind of melanin that they have, the pheomelanin, it actually has this kind of corrupting effect, which is what causes the melanoma, or what we know as skin cancer. That happens, okay? In melanated people, this doesn't happen because, like you rightly said, our melanin is geared to absorb UVA and UVB light, and it doesn't just absorb it and create waste or just kind of disappears into thin air. No, it converts that UVA and UVB into energy. And the fact, in fact, he mentioned earlier about the fact that it coats the melanin. I think she mentioned earlier that melanin coats the nucleus, and it's funny because another doctor, Dr. Alexis Cohen, talks about the fact that you need that coating around the mitochondria. In fact, your actual cells, internal cells, produce UVA and UVB light. So the idea of, or it's UV light, I'm not sure where it sits in the range actually, but she says your mitochondria actually produce light. So your body actually produces light, and it needs it to heal the cells. It needs light to heal your cells. So it's kind of interesting, you know, melanated people have the innate ability to do all of this. It's like their factory, their human factory, because you look at this as a kind of like a machine if you want to, but their human factory is geared up to optimize sunlight, the UV that's produced internally in the mitochondria. You know, the melanin coats our cell walls, and everything is geared up towards the efficient functioning of and healing of the human body. And then you have, you know, people who don't have the melanin advantage, and they're essentially in a situation where they can be externally manipulated via, like she said, via UV rays. You can externally change their DNA coding, utilizing radiation, which I find just wild. And it's kind of like, well, isn't that the Dr. Yakub story? Okay, is there? I don't know. That sounds eerily close to what the Nation of Islam are saying.
He believes it's not an adequate explanation. There is no real explanation or justification for the need for pale skin at all.
Yeah, because I think if
dark skin is always an advantage in every circumstance.
Right.
And I've said this before as well, and I don't mean this in a horrible way. In fact, I went on a podcast and I was talking about this very subject, this very topic, and I spoke about the fact that dark skin is always an advantage. Cold climate, warm climates, low light climates, high light climates, dark skin is always an advantage. In the whole vitamin D hypothesis about vitamin D being better, there's studies that show that actually what vitamin D is processed at exactly the same rate. It all depends on what the base level when entering that study was. So what if they entered what you found is that melanated people tend to have a lower base level of vitamin D, and that's simply because non-melanated people overproduce vitamin D in order to compensate for a vitamin deficiency in other areas as a result of not being able to synthesize UV light into these things. So that's what the studies suggest. That's what many of the studies suggest. And I haven't got any links in here. Once, if you go to my Melanin Ninjas video, I've put all the links inside the description of the video. You can kind of go through those and at your will. But these are the fact of the matter is, dark skin is always advantageous in every situation. And we've been sold this idea based on, you know, people will show you things like, you know, population density maps, and they'll kind of juxtapose those with melanin density maps, and they'll say, oh, look, you know, all of the light people are up here and all of the dark people are in here, and you can see that's just the evolutionary trait. It's like, no, that's not a sign of that's how evolution works. That's a sign of where non-melanated people are able to survive, because non-melanated people are the expansionist group, and everywhere they're able to survive, they've gone in and they've massacred and they've genocided and they've taken over. So the only reason you don't find non-melanated people in the Sahara, in the Sahel region of Africa, across the warm equatorial regions of the earth, is simply because they won't survive those climates. If they could survive those climates comfortably, they would have gone in, genocided, and replaced those people like they have done elsewhere in many places, like they've done in coastal regions of Australia, where, well, they're there, but they're not really surviving very well because of the highest rates of melanoma globally there. And as we know, that nation that borders Palestine has exactly the same problem. So, you know, this whole idea, this kind of like vitamin D advantage, pale skin, it's a myth, it's a fallacy, and you've heard her just say it. Dark skin is always an advantage. I'm not saying this to be some kind of a BLK supremacist. I'm just saying that this is the scientific fact. If you find it offensive, or you think I'm not being judicious enough by mentioning that, I just would remind you, when things are disadvantageous to pale skinned people, to white people, that's socialized across the entire, that's democratized and socialized across the entire, it becomes a human problem. Oh, look at, oh, you know, imperialism is a human problem. Oh, wherever human goes, wherever man goes, we destroy all of the animals, or wherever man goes, we commit genocide. It's like, no. Those are European traits. Stop democratizing them and making it sound like all people have just been doing that since the beginning of time, because no, these are distinctly European traits. But when it comes to their advantages, oh, they'll make it clear. These are things that only, you know, that only the superior biology of the white man can overcome. This, they don't really have many, other than like the one that we just mentioned, the vitamin D one, and everybody knows that verbatim. Why does everyone know this vitamin D hypothesis verbatim? It's because they've made sure they've sold it to everyone. But then when we turn around and we talk about advantages of melanin, that's, oh, don't be insensitive. Oh, stop talking like that. Oh, we're not superior in any way. It's like, come on.
People would just automatically assume, well, they went to live in the north where there's less sun,
Yes.
so therefore their skin changed colour. But that's not the case.
According to Professor Steve Jones, an eminent professor of biology, that is absolute nonsense.
Right. Okay.
There's just no reason at all for pale skin.
You would want to absorb more light. And, you know, I mean, why do we lose hair if we came to a colder climate, etc.?
Yeah.
So obviously something's wrong with that idea.
Right. All right. And Nigel contends that...
And just to add to that, I mean, you can hear people, they're saying quite clearly and outright, there's no advantage. It's absolute nonsense, this entire idea that, you know, the skin evolved to become lighter. I would argue it's more of a survival. What we're witnessing is this is the only climate they could survive. And actually there's been people that have suggested that there probably was a long period for the group that expanded, that became the modern European. There's probably a historical period of time, the biology suggests, where they may have been underground, which may have been why you had the evolution of the hairy bodies and the translucent skin. This is kind of something that is synonymous with evolution in dark or underground climates. That's kind of what that's synonymous with. Now, I'm not saying that this is the case, and I'm certainly not kind of like pushing this idea of kind of like they're all troglodytes or this, that, and the other. But what I am saying is that they are clearly trying to postulate and trying to come up with another reason that biological disadvantage exists, and it is a biological disadvantage. Why did they evolve to become that melanin deficient? Because that's what it is, a melanin deficiency. They're clearly trying to postulate and come up with a good reason as to why this is the case. But you can see they're throwing out all of these ideas that traditional science has basically sold to the public about, you know, the advantages of pale skin. It's all a fallacy.
The white races, the northern European races, have probably had the most interference from this outside entity called the grey alien.
Yeah, and he doesn't say that. It's very important to say he doesn't say that from the point of view of a kind of reverse racism.
Right.
It's just he's letting us know that, right, that's there, you may need to do something about it,
right,
and maybe suggesting ways that we could do something about it. And if you look at the record of the European nations throughout history, in terms of colonialism, imperialism, and what the havoc they've wreaked on the world, it makes the point
that
really.
It's the blue-eyed white races that have got their finger on the nuclear. Well, I mean, what about China? Because he mentions the Chinese as well, doesn't he? He says that they've had significant intervention. Am I right there?
That's right. Yes, there's been interception all across the board. They found ways of doing it, but the most efficient way to do it is on cell nucleuses that aren't protected by the melanin shield. Right. That's just the most efficient, easiest way to do it.
I mean, that's wild. That's wild, though. Obviously, I'm not co-signing any ideas of there being grey aliens, but what I'm saying is most religious stories that we are familiar with will probably have some grounding in events that have taken place. I always talk about the fact that in ancient Kemet, for instance, ancient Egypt, the deities, the people, many of the people that were deified were actual people that walked the earth, were deified ancestors, and this is a habit that they kept up. It's not something that they kind of immediately stop. This is a habit that is kind of kept up through time. So they would, the kings would pass on, and if they were great kings, they would go on to be passed on to the succeeding civilizations in different forms a lot of the time, but normally passed on. But it's interesting because if you take that in mind, they're talking about grey aliens, which I'm not saying I agree on. Actually, I'm not going to say, I'm definitely not saying that I agree with, because I haven't, I have no reason to agree in such a thing. But the whole ideal, the premise of what they're saying is that an outside force has used this race to interfere with the human global experience. And that's exactly what the story of Dr. Yakub is. Okay, now, like I said, I'm being very, very tongue-in-cheek here, but I think it's kind of hilarious that this story, which has, I wouldn't say recently, but it's kind of like come back up, and I see so many kind of like different commentators speaking about this story of Dr. Yakub, and they're laughing about how ridiculous it is. But now you've got these white, non-melanated people who are suggesting actually that sounds like it's got some credence. If there was a group of people that could be manipulated externally to carry out devious and dastardly acts on the behalf of a nefarious outgroup, then we have the biology that is perfect for this kind of manipulation. I think that's something. That's the end of the video. Yo, thank you guys for joining me on the King Mono show, and I just thought I'd share that interesting clip with you. Peace.